prestação de serviço. Então, indo para o lado especificamente de energia, de uma certa forma, essa parceria ela já existe no modelo
in the generation of energy through the federal government and
através do governo federal,
the services, generation, transmission, distribution for users, for consumers,
ao usuário, ao consumidor de energia,
and
consumidor de última análise de energia elétrica, e que
it's considered a long-term condition for infrastructure. For example, it's 30 years for the contracts. Now, when we go to the state of Ceará, for example, and possible partnership, public-private partnership, to meet the needs of the state. And that's what we've been trying to do, to seek a solution for the state. So I see that there is this space that's very healthy, so that the solution as a consumer and a private partner, so all can be met by with criteria and monitoring. And so on the technological side, results and where the technology can be improved within this deadline. And so you see that you have some photovoltaic panels and generators that will be a lot better. So anyway, that gives us long-term security. And so sometimes we think, well, if energy is cheaper, how will the state improve in this way? So there is a possibility of technological evolution. And so this is perfectly feasible. I mean, we already see this. We see similar models in this scenario. Now, as the state, we've been trying to offer to investors the opportunity so that large investments in energy but the generation of new sources of technology, allowing investors to get into the market with these new technologies and offer these services with long-term projects and contracts. So for example, new technologies such as solar that's advancing and offshore wind power. Offshore wind power will be a frontier of technology that will happen in the next 5-8 years and will change the scenario. Especially in the northeast of Brazil. In this aspect, I would like to mention something, that all of these technologies that we're talking about here, we're talking about information technology, technological evolution. When we talk about intelligence, so energy modulated hour by hour, energy that's stored. And so it's a type of investment that's very healthy for the government, for public services. not only to replace investments from the state, but also an opportunity to create an environment for investments. So I always consider energy is the infrastructure of all infrastructure. And so it's basically this aspect. Now, you talked about the state, about the government. André, regarding your role as investor, what is your perception of the PPPs? Well, it's important for us to understand the models that we have. PPP is only one of them. So at this moment, post-pandemic, it's important. So PPPs and also joint ventures, concession for the right of use, and building concessions. And so it's always interesting to think about getting private resources. And so it has to be feasible right from the get-go. And so from the different players that compose the development structure, to understand what are the different roles, so where there's good remuneration, but we need more predictability and safety. And we also need to understand the role in investments and the necessary time and produce different projects in order to meet the needs of the control agencies, to understand what is their role as a control agency and how they can collaborate without running major risks of the supremacy over the content, and to understand that we need to reduce bureaucracy, we need to facilitate licensing, we need to understand that the private sector, I mean, we've gone through some waves, if you will. So the concession model, the legislation, has completed 25 years. And in these 25 years, we've had many waves, if you will. Like in the 90s, especially energy, telecommunications, sanitation. Only now we have a legal framework, and that was also important. And then we can say that we're going through a pre-crisis era where there was a general mechanism for financing, especially from BNDES, in order to obtain these resources, offering guarantees. However, this is no longer a reality. So we're going through a different wave now. and the capitals market. So the capitals market requires governance that's even greater than develop projects with our colleagues, construction companies, and suppliers. Today, who participates in these projects, providing equity? I mean, we're talking about robust projects, and so in this scenario, we need to have more safety and security mechanisms to receive private investments so they can understand what are the processes. And monitoring. So public and private, and we need to mature. In this scenario of maturing, so it's a process at the federal level. And so, of course, many things have improved, but the states need to organize in order to follow this logic. And using these instruments, because we understand the state's capacity to make investments can be limited. There is liquidity, however, these resources will only happen if there is security. As a consultant in different projects, etc., what's your vision regarding the importance of PPPs? Well, we've been going through a crisis. Solutions from the government, PPPs and concessions, not only PPPs, but the government sometimes tries to provide more jobs, parks, things where not always are necessary. But anyway, and so the projects are starting to grow more and more, but there's still a lot of political issues. The PPPs that are launched, they're beautiful, they sound great, but there's no support or to discuss anything. So it's useless to, hire consultants and companies, financial modeling. When you're going to discuss with the government and they don't know the difference, what's a concession, what's a public-private partnership. And so it's useless to use concession as political propaganda. Anyway, we have some examples that are moving forward. Piauí, for example, a smaller state in the Northeast, and who have done PPPs, some interesting PPPs that can be improved with modeling, etc. Fortaleza, some videos from Roberto Cláudio. Some have had problems because of COVID. and you're trying to reduce energy costs. There's so many mechanisms for low and high voltage, and Fortaleza has many models in this sense. But also, concession. Some are really tiny concessions, and now with some interesting investments. So there's also the bid, the government bid. And where some things are very costly. And other sectors, sanitation, CAEMA, where we don't have treated water. And so to have such a huge loss of water, this is not supposed to happen anymore. But also investing in infrastructure is important. And so efficiency and investing in having water in this state. Projects linked to energy. And, the auctions from the government. Why many don't use this as a tool to have cheaper energy. And so you go to any state, you go anywhere, and then direct to the distributor. And many don't have this kind of management, if you will. So anyway, we've been participating for low and high voltage. And a huge market, really. After it becomes a reality, we start asking ourselves, why am I paying such expensive energy? Well, the first state to launch a PPP, a public-private partnership, CAGESI, for example, even until the 1st of September. What are the challenges that still exist? Well, although my area is specifically more related to energy, we see many problems that are quite evident. We have the problem with water, which is very characteristic of our region. The solution of water that has to do with huge energy costs. Water and energy have a direct link with production costs, treatment and transportation costs, pumping costs. So even with the interbasin transfer and the intelligent use of interconnections of water basins and watersheds, we need to think more of an alternative solution. always thinking in the long term, and we can see that the state of Ceará has this long-term concern, if you will. It's part of the state's development. Ceará 2050, for example, you know. And so this PPP, this whole process, in a PPP model to desalinate water and offer this water to the state's treated water system, that's an initiative that's quite a pioneer and an initiative that takes time. I mean, Eduardo talked about the political issue. We see quite a lot in the government. There's a concern to do things quickly. The mandates, etc., for years. And so you have to do that whole process. You have to score a goal in the first half. You can't wait for the second half. And so this undermines things. And in the state of Ceará, we see that there is this long-term perception. So desalination is one case. In energy, we're struggling. I mean, we're trying to show this long-term will need energy. And in this context, we're trying to show that it's more important to have a public-private partnership and the private side and to monitor, to demand greater efficiency in this relationship. So also, HTMI, the initiative of the two water agencies, COGER and CAGESI, a PMI that's going to transform into a model, which is the use, the concession of water, of the area. I mean, there'll be concession in the use of the water, and they'll be able to use, to invest in solar and allocate to water consumers. And so anyway, this model was developed. It's in evolution. This is something that takes time. This is the major bottleneck, I think, that we still need to evolve. I mean, greater speed in this process. Although we know that in the government, you need to be backed up by compliance, by good governance. But it's very clear that when we're talking about investments, and we're going to have results, and the state will monitor this during executive mandates. And so you need to have a configuration, a constitution, if you will, that will give you a great security of governance for the state. And so we have desalination, the use of the Asian area, the possibility also water consumption for the state as a consumer, as public director and direct administration. It wasn't really a PPP, the traditional model of a PPP established, but the state of Ceará also had a major breakthrough in a strategic partner, which was the Port, SCP. So, yes, a form of public-private partnership. We chose the choosing process is also important. Who in the world has the conditions that I need? So you have those different options, and from those different options, you choose the most adequate one for your model for what you need, in the case of Porto do Pecém. And also the installation, the transfer of Transágua, which will also be an interesting process in this sense. It's happening. I mean, there are different difficulties. It's part of the government. Some people don't like it. They're against, everything gets delayed, and it's not easy. And the issue of public lighting, something else that we're trying to also mature, if you will. Also, natural gas. Natural gas is another thing. Although, within concessions for the state, the case of the gas company, for example, there is the possibility of having an evolution for private investments to expand the network of pipelines, gas pipelines for natural gas. So in this aspect, that's the evolution in Ceará. We have an interesting thing in Ceará. We're pioneers here, especially in energy, in water as well. I mean, the water management company, the water resources company was a pioneer. The use of renewable energy sources. And develop this entire development for growth and wind. We're already looking towards offshore. And the use of energy by the state could bring about a model that could revolutionize the attraction of investments. Energy to be used as a tax break. I'm going to attract a major technology like a lithium battery factory, for example, and I want, instead of offering ICMS tax from if we can offer cheap energy. I mean, this is something that we can do to attract more investments that will put an end to the tax wars, to offer something different for the state of Ceará, or for the Northeast as a whole. Yeah, that's very interesting. So in this way, in this aspect, is what we're trying to evolve with the state, in the sense of attracting investments, attracting private partners. Yeah, really interesting, these energy credits, this idea of energy credits. And we know there is a deadline for this to happen. So anyway, other types of incentives to attract investments. Well, André, you're from Ceará, but today you're in São Paulo with a huge investment fund. How has the state of Ceará evolved in this sense, and what are the challenges that the state still has to grow and to evolve more? With new PPPs, new public-private partnerships. I think I agree that the state of Ceará has a great characteristic. It's always a pioneer. In terms of PPPs, I have the satisfaction of participating in this process here in Ceará. We modeled the VaptVupt. I remember in 2011, the state government launched 8 call for projects. We participated in 7, we won 5. And we did many of those models, and even those that had no feasibility, And the state had done this until then. So SEDA was the first state to organize itself and issued a manual for public-private partnerships right after Castellão. Castellão was the first one to be delivered, thanks to a great monitoring process from the state government, together with the group that won the bid. So all of this created something very positive for the future of SEDA in terms of PPPs. I think with time also, even after going through the crisis, in some projects, the state of SEDA needs to be careful. We need to be careful so that the projects that we do be mature enough and to be sure that they're going to roll out for sure. Because when we hire a project and then you give up, you create a gap, if you will. So it's important to study this well, prioritize, to work with creativity. You know, with cheap energy, I think that's a great idea. All of these initiatives help the private sector to come and invest in our states. So fundamentally, when we talk about a PPP that's paid by public administration, and we have to decrease expenses and increase efficiency so that you can improve budgetary expenditure. And in this kind of environment, you can't have extra expenditure. So to use the PPP instrument for health, for education, for jails, etc., but with the premise, let's not generate any extra budgetary demand for the state greater than we already spend today. So any PPP project that's done, administrative project, we can have new expenditure. We need to improve the way we spend. Now, it's great, it's important for the future to seek these creative instruments and to understand the different associations, be it concessions, authorizations, and identify where the state can collaborate institutionally with private projects so that the reduction of the costs for infrastructure can happen. And those projects where the government participates extensively, they can create guarantees, efficient guarantees to show security in that investment. And like Eduardo mentioned, the case of Piauí. Piauí, we also know the process that was developed there, and it's good for SEDA to look at this example. It's a neighboring state that did this really well. And actually in Piauí, that was modeled by ourselves as well. And this kind of concern, with the regulation, predictable regulation, great guarantees, everybody working in a collaborative manner, we have this harmonious way of working, and we're able to get out of our difficulties. So, since the credit operations and SEDA is a state that honors its contracts, and it's a safe state to invest in. So to use all of these instruments that are available, because the resources exist. We in our fund, we see this. We're looking for projects, but that's the challenge. Good quality projects that are predictable. That's been difficult. So we've even invested in our own model. So if SEDA wants to invest in these environment, but not only our fund, but other investment funds available in Brazil, many for sure are going to look for SEDA. You've been working with different projects, not only in SEDA, but how do you see, making a comparison with other experiences that you've had, how Ceará has evolved in terms of PPPs, the challenges that still exist. Well, let's consider Ceará as a whole, okay? So you take Fortaleza, this Fortaleza didn't have this track record, this story. And now many projects that have been developed. And this is an issue of the guarantees, the legal guarantees, you know, without having legal guarantees, that's a project that perhaps will fail. And so that's the possibilities that we have. And so during the whole procedure, that's something that you can deliver. You know, the methodology, what's possible or not. And some concessions that will become a reality, but there are many projects that perhaps no. So like we heard, others that were done. I have a project that's well done. I'm not going to start from scratch. So let's use what was used in City Hall. And so really interesting projects when you think about it. Always linked to efficiency, energy efficiency, reforms, etc. And so that's a great example. The state has many possibilities. We heard CRH, AGES, and other projects. And so I don't see this as giving us many returns. But if you do this well, I mean, if this discussion is well done and the state is not afraid to give guarantees, when we talk about a guarantee fund, and so the more guarantees you give, the more partners you'll have in the business, and who will really win is the government. And won't see this as a cost, but we'll have more participants and we'll have greater gains. So that's really the idea. And, you know, there are many possibilities for these concessions, not only at the state level, but at the federal level, Mucuripe and BNDES, Jericoacoara study. So it's very interesting. Services, support services, construction and operations. I mean, it's all really interesting, really. Yeah, the opportunities, not only in Ceará, but many consultations and this new framework for sanitation. Well, our time is almost up here, but I would like to hear from you, gentlemen. What opportunities this new framework can bring about for the state of Ceará? And in your opinion, I mean, we heard here a little bit, but are there other specific projects that are opportunities, would you say? Yeah, I think what the two of you had said, the vision of the investor and consulting support, to talk about some things that are really interesting, the optimization, the efficiency, reduction in costs and efficiency in services. And so that's the main point, I would say. Where are the projects that have a level of qualification? Sanitation is there's another one. Although we don't have a source of natural gas, but logistics for natural gas is really interesting. So if we look at these scenarios, sanitation, I think, is what needs to be done, excellent returns for society as a whole, and great opportunity for investors because there's a gap of opportunities, of efficiencies that's very high. So I think, this is really what deserves special attention. And even more so, they're all related to long-term. We're talking about considerable investments in the long term. Okay, André, your vision about sanitation. Yeah, I think the state of Ceará already has a lot of history of good quality planning and needs to identify how to organize. So municipalities that can organize as a consortium in order to have scale for some projects. I think AGESI will continue playing an important role in this sense. I think the challenge for universalization of water services and more than 90% of sewage is challenging for any state. And so for this, we'll require many resources for investments, and private initiative should be received by CAGESI, by the state of Ceará, in a positive way. And of course, when this project, when this law will be passed, it doesn't mean that there is a provocation and induction to privatize. No, it's towards efficiency. If this efficiency is going to happen with private initiative or alone, if we have the capacity to do this, having financial partners, that's what experience is going to show us. But it's important that the state can understand, well, it's a problem, to seek the necessary efficiencies. Now, about projects that the state can develop, I see with close attention to know the projects that are being developed in Ceará, because perhaps we can participate in some of them. But I think some good experience would also be an example of neighboring state, a project to use data, voice and video data. And I think that could be an interesting initiative for Ceará. Yeah, excellent. Our time is up, Eduardo, unfortunately, but would also like to hear more about this. Yeah, and many services that are related in the Northeast, for example, it's very important. Development in the countryside. Sobral and Cariri. Water reuse. And Fortaleza and Ceará has this great capacity. We throw out a lot of sewage into the ocean. So you have different services to support, and these are great opportunities for Ceará. Yeah, excellent. We had the vision of the state, the vision of investors, project consultants in public-private partnerships. Unfortunately, our time is up, but I'm sure that your words were very enriching. And for sure, we're going to come back and discuss this topic in other opportunities. Thank you very much for your participation. All the best. Yeah, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you. Thank you, and congratulations for the event.